guys, how you doing? So we're going to start our new unit, geology. We're going to start with the history of the Earth and how the Earth was formed. And we learned that in astrology. And now we're going to be looking at how we as humans look at the Earth and how it has changed over time and what that means to us and to the fossil record of life on our planet. Okay? Okay, so we're going to have 2 lectures in this unit. If you have not watched this lecture in Edpuzzle for the first time and you're on YouTube, you need to go to Edpuzzle and watch this the first time in Edpuzzle so you can get credit for watching it, okay? So please do not watch this video the first time in YouTube. Please watch it on Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle. Be on Edpuzzle. Okay, let's get started. All right, so we know about the formation of the Earth. We learned about it in the astrology unit. We learned that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and we know that things have lived on Earth for a long time, for millions of years, and things have evolved over time to get to be humans. But how did we figure out what lived when? And how did we figure out what kind of creatures they were and what they were made out of and how they lived? And so this unit that we're going to be covering now is talking about all those things and how we learned as humanity about the history of our planet. And I had to include a dinosaur because they are just the coolest things from Jurassic Park, of course, because, look at that. That roar is awesome. We all know it. We've all seen it. And we all love it. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so the history of our planet was just a secret to us as human beings because we were not alive during most of the existence of our planet. And as life evolved on our planet and became more complicated, there were no humans to watch it and to keep records. And so what we've had to do is figure it out. And so one of the main ways that we've done that is by fossils. Now, fossils are something that we think of as samples or shells or different leaves that we've seen in our lifetime. And if we were in class and we were meeting, I would show you a bunch of really fun fossils, but we're not. So let me tell you about different kinds of fossils. Fossils can be an animal that died in mud and then got compacted over time. And then gradually, as that animal broke down, rock replaced its spot within those layers. And so it's different than the soil around it. But it can also be evidence of an animal. For example, a feather can be a fossil. Not a whole animal, just the feather. Or some leaves from a tree or a bush. Maybe a footprint. Or a nest or a burrow where some kind of animal lived. These can all be fossils. And so a fossil is evidence of a living thing, and it doesn't have to be the actual living thing. Okay? Remember, it is not the actual living thing. When we find a fossil, it is the rock that replaced where it was. For example, the footprint was here, and then rock replaced it, and now you can see the footprint embedded in something because rock has replaced it there. I've seen crabs where people are digging them out of other rocks. There's a lot of YouTube videos. It's pretty cool if you want to take a look at that. Now, before people understood what fossils were, they noticed that they were similar ones in similar layers. For example, in different places in England, in different places around the world, people would start excavating and they would start finding fossils and they'd be like, oh, this is a scientific discovery. And more scientists would come and they'd start doing research and studying them. But we didn't really know what existed when in time on planet Earth. And so as we started collecting different information from all over the world, these time periods got the names of the places that we found things. One really good example is a place called the Permian period is from a place in Russia called Permia. Now, Permia is a place in Russia where a lot of bones were found from the Permian period. And when that happened, people were excavating and finding these fossils and documenting them. And people at different places in the world were documenting different amounts of fossils being found. And different periods of time in our geologic timeline are named different things from the places on Earth where they were found. Okay? And gradually we put the timeline together to show how and when things lived on our planet. And we are still fine-tuning that every day as scientists search and study the fossil record on Earth, using other techniques too, which we'll talk about just a little bit later. So, people started looking at layers of dirt. And we all know the Grand Canyon, and we all have seen different beaches and stuff like that where places are eroding, and we see the layers of the sedimentary rock. And you learned about sedimentary rock in the 7th grade, hopefully last year. I hope this was one of the units. We kind of didn't hit a lot of it near the end of the school year there, but sedimentary rocks are the rocks that are layers, and as the layers of things get added up over time, it builds up. And so here you can see, and the bottom layer would be the oldest, and the top layer would be the youngest. And so you always need to remember that. The oldest layer is on the bottom, the youngest layer is on the top. This is going to be probably in your exam for this unit. It's going to be in your lab for this unit. It's probably going to be on the state tests that we're going to take in a few weeks. It is going to be important that you remember that the lowest levels of sedimentary rock are the oldest, and the highest layers of sedimentary rock are the youngest. Okay? So down here is the oldest rock layer, and over time, these layers build up, and the youngest one is on top. Now, I need you to know something about this. These thicknesses are not consistent. This could be 1,000,000 years, this could be 10,000 years. And so we can't think about what those timelines mean because every place is different depending on what's going on in the world. If it was underwater and now it's not, if it was a beach and so things got washed away, then it was like above land, it could have been a desert at some time. We don't know. The Earth has changed a lot because of plate tectonics throughout its 4.5 billion years that it's existed. And so we need to just remember that the lower the levels, the older they are, and the higher the layers, the younger they are. Okay? Now, as we learn about these, we have learned that different fossils can be very important because they were everywhere. They were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. And we know whenever we find this fossil, it only lived during this period of time. For example, troglodytes only lived during this period of time in the Paleozoic. Oops. And so we know if we find troglodyte fossils in this specific place, then we know this soil sample that's being exposed right now, or that got dug up for fossils that we excavated, is from the Paleozoic period. Okay, look, there's the Permian. And we know if we find a belemnite or an ammonite, we know those happened during the Mesozoic period. And these are millions of years ago. So you can see how we have eras and we have periods which are broken down. And then we have how many millions of years ago this existed. Now we all know that 65 million years ago is when the meteor hit the Yucatan and then it wiped out a lot of the dinosaurs. Okay? These are index fossils. Okay? These fossils indicate very importantly, specifically during this period of time that they existed. Now, this is a very small, not very detailed copy of the fossil record. Okay? And as you can see, we are right here, the last 10,000 years. We are in the Holocene. Now, we have entered a new era that's not included in here, and that's the Anthropocene. And this is a mass extinction event. We are currently in the 6th mass extinction, and this has to do with the effects of humans on Earth and what we're doing to the planet and how we're destroying animals. Okay? You can see down here, 4.6 billion years ago, when Earth was first formed, how different events happened. The ozone layers formed, the atmosphere formed, the oceans formed, meteorites were just slamming on Earth all over, kind of like the moon was getting, all that stuff we see on the moon was happening on Earth, but we have plate tectonics, and so our planet smoothed out and different elements separated, so we have our oceans, the Earth's core solidified, and we began having simple marine life on Earth. Bacteria, viruses, funguses, algae, jellyfishes, and then over time, as you can see, as we go up on this chart, life gets more complicated as we go through different periods of time. But please remember that the size of these boxes does not demonstrate how much time happened in these boxes. From this, just this teal blue area is like 520 million years, where this band up here is just 67 million years. And so these bands of time down here, the Paleozoic and the Mesozoic, are huge, huge periods of time. This Cenozoic period is when life got much more complicated on our planet for mammals, which we are, and we got different things like flowering plants and a much more elaborate life forms that we associate with modern time. Okay? All right. Now, let's talk about some geology. Okay. So now let's start talking a little bit about geology. Okay? Let's talk about the law of superposition. Now, this is important. This is part of your vocabulary words, and you need to know what the law of superposition is. The law of superposition has to do with where something is and how it is layered in the earth. Okay? So let's look at this image. All right? We can see the rock layers. We can see that C is the oldest, and then B is on top of it, and then A is on top of that. Okay? Then we have this intrusion of D, and we have a fault line of E. Now, E can be an earthquake fault line. It can be a shift from some kind of river or some kind of a break in some kind of rock formation that happens. So it could be that something fell or shifted because there was like a river underneath that became empty and like the ground fell, or it could be because of an earthquake. And then we have D, which is this layer that's like in here. So that could have been from a volcanic eruption that happened over time. It could have been from an embedded river and the soil that was moved through the river. And so there are different breaks. It's not this perfect layering in different areas, right? We have soil that accumulates in layers, and the older is on the bottom and the younger is on the top. But different things can happen over time to cause them to not be perfectly lined up. And we need to remember that when we think about geology, okay? Now, over many years, geologists in different countries have found different places where they found fossils and they were studying them. And they were like, okay, we're in this place called Cambria in Wales, and we found all these fossils. And so when we figured out how the timeline went together, we named that timeline from the city that identified those fossils first, which is a little small city in Wales, which is in England. Okay? Another place, or Devonian, that's another place in England, from Devon. Then we have Switzerland, is Jura, the Jura Mountains. They found the Jurassic period there. And so this is how this came together. So all these different places around the world, they're all collecting all this information about fossils and dinosaurs, and they're studying and they're saving when they actually find bones, and they find fossils that were once bones, but now they're like, and they're putting all this stuff together and they're measuring and they're collecting all this information and they're studying them. And gradually in organizations, they're putting the information together to start to create a map of what the earth looked like and how the timelines go together. So let's talk about fossils. Now remember, fossils can be made out of anything, a leaf, the bones of the animal. And remember, they are not the actual bones, they are replacement rock that has been filled. So here we have this baby animal, it died. It's very sad, but it was in this mud. And then there was a flood, and it didn't move, there was just enough sediment to cover it. And then over time, it dried and it got squished. And inside here, layers keep getting on top and on top. And the animal begins to break down. But instead of breaking down in the rock and the bones staying there, we're biomaterial. We break down. We're living things. And this space gradually gets filled with different rock. And this rock becomes the fossil. And so when we look at these fossils, we don't look for DNA in them. We look for structure. How was this animal? What was it built like? How did it move? Did it stand on 2 or 4 legs? How big was it? Does it look like the bones have structure to handle a lot of weight, or does it look like they were light? And looking at these, this is how scientists began studying dinosaurs and things that lived before humans were on Earth, and how we began to identify how life evolved on our planet. And we looked for clues, for more complexity, from leaves on plants that had one shape, they were monocot, to then leaves changing and having 2 parts and being dicot. And then finally plants evolving to have flowers when they became angiosperms. And they can see this in the fossil record as things became more and more complicated over time. All right, well, how did we figure out how old these things are, right? Well, we used 2 different techniques. We used one technique, which is the law of superposition, which means where is it in the fossil record, right? How we looked at it before. Where does it fall? Do all these things around it are similar? And in this other part of the world, we found these other similar fossils. And then also new technologies. Now, radioactive dating is not really that new of a technology, but compared to the law of superposition, it was a really big jump in how we were able to date things. And what we used the radiation of carbon. And we were able to measure different radioactive particulates that are within the rocks about when they were formed. And using this, we can narrow it down to like 100,000 years. And I know that seems like a really long time still. And some of it we can narrow down to like 50,000 years. And I know that still seems like a really long time. But if you think about the fact that we are looking at living things over billions of years, 50,000 years is not a lot. And when we talk about the fossil record and we talk about geology, time is a very different measurement compared to the life of a human being. And we need to remember that. Okay? All right. Paleontologist scientists are the scientists that study prehistoric life. They use fossils to figure out when things lived, how they lived, and they use these fossils to try and determine what they ate. Do they have nubby teeth? Do they chew things like cows? Or do they have sharp predator teeth like, lions and tigers? Can they just tear things apart? Or do they have teeth like people where they could seem they have both kinds of teeth? They have the kind of teeth that can mash things, but they also have the teeth that can tear things apart like our canine teeth. And they use the fossil record to identify when things lived and to learn how things evolved over time. So in this picture, I have 4 things. I have 4 rock layers. Rock layer 1 is on the bottom and rock layer 4 is on the top. Go ahead and answer the question that I have attached here for you. Okay, so as we look at fossil records, they can tell us what environments were like. Let's say I'm in a desert and I'm walking around this desert and I find this really big hunkin' shark tooth. It looks just like a shark tooth, and it's humongous. And if a shark this big lived now, I mean, this thing would be like that movie Mega something or other that we saw with Jason Statham. Okay? Mega, I forget, Megatron? I don't know. You guys will remind me after you see this video. Well, this size shark doesn't live anymore, but it did a long time ago. Now, this gentleman, Gordon Hubble, he was a fossil hunter, and he was in Peru, and he found these giant triangular shark teeth. And he found out that it was an ancestor to a great white shark. But what are these teeth doing in the desert in Peru? And what we were able to determine from his studies and his work is that at one point, this desert in Peru was underwater because, I mean, people were not going to be carting some giant shark body really far into, right? Because people weren't even alive then. How is this shark going to get here? Who's going to move it? So scientists can tell us, using this, how things were on planet Earth way before, millions of years ago, how the planet has changed over time due to plate tectonics. Fossils are usually formed from things that are hard, and some really good examples of really unusual fossils are animals that are trapped in ice. Recently, because the glaciers are melting, we found a mammoth in ice that defrosted, and we actually have DNA samples of this amazing fossil that has been saved of pieces of fur, and it's just phenomenal. If you want, I would definitely look up some YouTube videos of the autopsy that they did of this mammoth. It was amazing. And another thing, of course, that you remember from Jurassic Park is that insects were getting stuck in tree sap, and tree sap turns into amber. And so they were, they were going into mosquitoes in the amber, and they were taking out the dinosaur DNA. I think that's the whole premise of Jurassic Park. But I mean, that's not reality. But you can get some DNA samples from the mammoth and maybe the mosquito, but for the mosquito. But these are species of animals that have gone extinct. And when a species of animal goes extinct, that means it's no longer alive and that its gene pool is dead. And it can't be saved. And right now, we are driving a lot of animals into extinction on the planet due to a lot of different things, from cutting down deforestation, cutting down forests, converting forests into palm oil producing farms, and from our plastic pollution. And so all these different things are affecting the amount of animals that live on planet Earth. And extinction is when they are gone and there are no more left. And there are a lot of different creatures that I'm sure that you've learned about in a lot of different movies and time periods and studied. And you know that they are no longer alive and they no longer exist. And there is no way for us to bring them back. Okay, so here I have a few questions for you. And I would really appreciate it if you would take your time and answer these questions in the Ed Puzzle correctly. I'm going to list them out and I'm going to write them. This is what you're going to be doing. You're going to use this chart to answer these 5 questions. And what you're going to do is say, this is where this fossil was found. Okay? This is the type of fossil it was. How has the location changed? So what did it used to be? And what you're going to do is you're going to pick A, B, C, or D for each of these questions. You're going to tell me A, it used to be in a forest. B, it used to be underwater. C, it used to be a tropical island. Or D, has not changed since the fossil was formed. Now, I'm going to verbally tell you the answer to question 1 so that I can help you. So the first fossil was found, and it's a seashell. And it was found on the side of a mountain. Now, we know seashells do not live on sides of mountains. They live underwater. And so the first one, question 1, has got to be a B. It must be used to be underwater. because we know seashells were not living and nothing could have moved it there because there was nothing living that would have moved a seashell from the ocean to a mountain like human beings would. Now take your time and answer the next 5 questions. You're doing great. Just be patient with yourself and think about it. Almost done. Okay, let's move on. You guys are done. So, finish answering the questions. Submit your Ed puzzle. Great job. If you need to watch this again because you're not sure about the information, please be sure to watch it on YouTube. Okay? Good job.